Beck and welcome to a video where I'm going to recommend 5 romance books for your fun and enjoyment. So without further ado, let's get started. I usually read romance that is either straight up in our world romance, or I read romance with a little bit of a twist, sometimes a bit magical, sometimes set in fantasy. So I've tried to keep these 5 recommendations in a category of, yes, it's romance, the focus is romance, and sometimes there might be a little bit of fantastical thrown in, but it's not enough to throw you off if you are purely a romance reader. My first recommendation is Witches Get Stuff Done, and this one follows protagonist Riley Everett. Now, a few months ago in Riley's life, her mother passed away, and so Riley is on a mission to connect to her mother's past and her history, and so she's going to Starfall Point, which is a small island where her mum grew up, because her aunt lives there and says you can come and look at all the history of the family. And so that is what Riley's doing. She's off to this small town, this small island, to figure out what's going on with her family history. However, while she's on her way there, now don't read the synopsis because it spoils the first third of the book for you. While she's on her way there, she's getting really boat sick, and usually she gets motion sick. That's kind of a given for her, but for this it's edged with a little bit of something else. And while she's on the boat, she accidentally throws up on the shoes of this guy named Edison. And Edison is the small town librarian, and inevitably these two have had a accidental interaction that turned negative, and they are going to be love interests. Anyway, Riley's on this boat, she's feeling sick, and she's feeling sick because she doesn't quite realize that waves of magic are hitting her body, and her family have ties to magic on this island, and her mother didn't want that for her life, so she left the island. However, now Riley is returning to the island, she's tapping into magic that she hasn't known her whole life. So that is why she's sick, because it's a bit of an equilibrium shift. Now, while she's at the island, the realtor gives her the keys to this huge mansion, and that's where her aunt lives. So there's a whole plot of investigative witchiness to it, where Riley needs to solve the mysteries related to this house. She also makes friends with these 2 women who end up forming her coven, and she's in a romance with this guy Edison as well. And the reason I wanted to recommend this is because even though it did the story justice in the sense that it felt grounded to me, it also didn't take itself too seriously, and it was fun and exciting and grounded. And the romance had great communication. I personally hate miscommunication, so I cannot stand that. And even though, like I said, our characters, Edison and Riley, met on not the greatest circumstances, they really mended that quite quickly rather than latching onto it as like the key thing that they're not going to like about each other. And I found that quite mature to do, because sometimes in romance, if you have a little problem, it can then get stretched so much just for the sake of the drama. And I just don't like that. So I like that this actually went in a different direction, and it centered these 2 characters as a romance, but also Riley's developmental story as well. So it had some great moments in there. There was a great spicy scene in there, so you're not missing out on the romance. And I just think it was a great time. I read this book and the sequels, which is books only 2 and 3. And they were fast audiobooks to read. They were enjoyable. I gave them all 4 stars. And that's why I wanted to recommend them, because it's not every day that you find a really great witchy book that's also a romance. Next, I want to recommend Sword Crossed, which is marketed as a fantasy romance. And that's only because it is a romance that's like a period romance set in a fantasy world, so it can get away with the setting without having to necessarily adhere to all of the traditional values set out in olden times world building. So I really liked that it was a bit of a modern spin on that almost traditional lens because of that fantasy element. So the fantasy is kind of on the fringes of the book, and you're just reading it mainly for the romance, which is, we are following Matanesh J, and he is the dutiful heir to his struggling family's business, which means he therefore has to hire a swordsman to defend his arranged marriage, just in case on the day of the marriage somebody challenges him, because he can't fight with a sword, so he needs someone to defend him. And it is very likely that someone is going to challenge them on their wedding day, because he knows just who the person will be. Unfortunately, because Matty's family is struggling financially and they're trying to hide it, and therefore this arranged marriage will solve the issues of their house being, poor behind the scenes, because he's trying to hide that, he has to hire this swordsman, but also not spend too much money. Enter Luca Pierre, who is a con artist and also a swordsman, and he's got a rate that Matty can afford. However, at the beginning of the book, these 2 have a hilarious meet cute where Luca has this broken watch and he runs into Matty in a tavern and pretends that Matty broke the watch, and therefore Matty gives him money in order to fix the watch, even though Matty couldn't afford it. He's aware that everyone saw the interaction and that he needs to maintain his reputation by giving over funds to Luca. Later on in the night or the next day, he goes to where he hires the swordmaster to protect him, and it turns out that it's going to be Luca. So they have a bit of a heated discussion, but they can't really do anything. Matty can't budge. So reluctantly, both of them enter into an agreement. For Luca's part, why he's there is because he's trying to reinvent himself anew and escape the crime that he committed in his previous town. So he's very much trying to distance himself from his past, whereas Matty is trying to heal his past and help his family. So I love that the external forces of this plot and the secrets and the politics are what ended up influencing the relationship. It wasn't these two characters communicating with each other, it was more so external forces that influenced their relationship. And when I started this, I got quite nervous about the arranged marriage aspect and Matty potentially seen as cheating on his wife-to-be. However, when I was introduced to Sophia, who is the wife-to-be, she was just like a business partner. She was a friend, and from the get-go, she asked Matty if there was anybody else that he had his eye on. And at this point, he hadn't romantically taken to Luca, so he answered very honestly and said no. So I love that eventually a lot of things came to a head. I love that there was a conflict and an outcome of that conflict, and then later on in the plot is when the ending was. So even though there was a conflict, there was a bit of an outcome, and then there was a scene that we couldn't envision as a reader because these characters had like planned something. So I love when a romance is clever like that and you can see it building to a natural conflict, and then they use that conflict to build something new afterwards as a secondary climax. I think that's great. One of my very small criticisms about this book is that even though I'm a huge fantasy reader, I love romance, but I found that this needed a little bit more emphasis or detail and foundation on the plot and political aspect, because at certain points some terms or some intentions were thrown into conversations or arguments, and it felt to me like they had no history or no backing because they weren't properly foreshadowed. Maybe they were foreshadowed and I missed them, but they just weren't very clear to me, and they just seemed thrown into the story to drive a wedge or make the characters pivot at a pivotal point, and that didn't feel quite right to me. I still gave this a 4 stars and really enjoyed it. I think the ending was solid. I think the relationship between Luca and Matty was very steamy and just very wholesome at the same time somehow. They had such an intimacy and I really loved that. And so when I think of romance, I think of Matty and Luca. They're just beautiful. So that's why I wanted to talk about this. I've only recently read it and really enjoyed it. So it's one that I'm glad I waited to film this video for, because I'm very much missing Valentine's Day with the timing of this video, but I don't care because I finished Sword Crossed and I can now talk about it and you should go and read it. Then I have a really short book. It is in fact a novella, and it is also ridiculous, and it's called Smash and Grab. And this one is a dinosaur shifter romance, but hold tight and bear with me. It follows Simon, who is an archaeologist, and he's just made the find of his career. And while he's working on this, another agency wants what he has found and therefore targets him in order to steal it and then sell it on the black market. Enter our character, who Simon is going to fall in love with. He works for an agency that protects artifacts, and he also has a pink mohawk and can shift into a raptor. So therefore, before this character enters the scene, one night Simon is working late at the lab. He gets accosted by these goons, these bodyguards, and they try and steal this fossil from him. However, in attempting to steal this from him, enter the pink mohawk, love interest, savior, dinosaur shifter, who whisks Simon and the fossil away to safety, and they go on the road trying to escape these goons, meanwhile working with the agency that the mohawk love interest works with in order to protect the fossil while Simon is trying to preserve it. So it's a forced proximity male-male romance, with Simon realizing that he's actually into men as well and taking notice in our lead love interest. I love the tension that arises from those moments, because the character notices different things physically about their love interest and then they go, oh wait, I shouldn't be noticing that. And it's just quite funny to read about. At least I think it is. So I really liked that awakening and that interest. It was also great that the book was so short, because you know, you can only suspend your disbelief for so long, and this was just enough time for me to suspend my disbelief and have an enjoyable time with it rather than question it too much and go, why is this happening again? So if you want something quick and sharp and easy to digest, also quite humorous and not too serious in tone, I would suggest reading this one. I had a great time with it. I've read the sequel, and the third book is on my to-be-read pile. The audiobooks are really short, so I've been doing them that way. Would recommend. They're a fun time to listen to. So that is a romance that is probably the most fantasy on this list. The rest are more romance tiered rather than with that fantasy element. My next recommendation is one of Emily Henry's books, and it is my favorite of Emily Henry's so far, and that is Funny Story. And this book follows Daphne. So Daphne used to be engaged to this guy named Peter, Peter, the guy, and he's recently broken it off with her after they were engaged and dating for a long time. So Daphne's like, great, now I have my career as a children's librarian, which is just paying the bills, but she doesn't quite have enough money to strike out on her own. So she approaches the only guy that she possibly can that would understand her situation. However, we've got Miles, who is the guy that she approaches, and Miles is dating Peter, P-E-T-A, who is a woman. Peter and Peter were best friends, realized that they were in love, broke up with their respective partners, and now they're dating each other. So Daphne and Miles are now left over behind. And they're like, well, we need to get on with our lives. This is a weird situation, and the only other person that knows it is the ex of the other person. So they move in together. Daphne moves into Miles' apartment, and both of them are grieving this lost relationship and the futures that they had envisioned, but I loved their conversations with each other. They both felt like they were individual people, as well as getting together and trusting each other, forming a friendship, an attraction, and a relationship. And it's called Funny Story because, yes, the premise is ridiculous, it doesn't really take itself too seriously in that regard, but I found that the characters were very fully formed. Even the side characters felt like actual people, not just like stereotypes thrown in as a supplement to the story. And I really appreciated that both of them had their own goals and their careers and aspirations, and that they worked together. There were so many cute, soft moments with Daphne and Miles that just made my heart flutter. It was adorable. And Miles is described as scruffy and chaotic, and honestly I would slap caring on there as well because he's just got so much heart. So I really liked reading about him as a love interest as well, and just seeing both of them heal and then come to a point where they can be together was just so lovely, and I just enjoyed it so much. And I think Emily Henry manages to write that introspection and that character development and romance at the same time and keep everything of a pretty good level. So that's why I keep going back to Emily Henry, although like I said, Funny Story has been my favorite by her so far, closely followed by Beach Read. And then lastly on this romance books recommendation list is Well Met. And this one follows Emily, who knows that there is going to be strings attached when she makes the move to Willow Creek to live with her sister and help her sister rehabilitate after an injury in an accident. And her sister has a teenage daughter, so Emily's niece, and Emily's niece wants to join the Ren Fair, the Renaissance Fair. However, you need an adult, like a capable, able-bodied adult, to act as chaperone when your teenager signs up for a Ren Fair. So Emily's like, well, I guess I have to sign up for the Ren Fair as well because my niece wants to do it and she's been obsessed with it. When Emily is signing up, however, she encounters this grumpy school teacher who is initiating all of the volunteers. And the reason he's so grumpy is because he takes the Ren Fair so seriously. He's got a personal history tied to it, whereas Emily is so lighthearted and happy all the time that he can't really understand why she's not serious. When both of them dress up for Ren Fair though, they almost become their characters, as you are supposed to do. So Emily becomes this barmaid and Simon, the love interest, becomes this pirate. He's notorious for being at Ren Fair and causing a ruckus and having fun. So it's very opposite to his very serious and grumpy persona. And while he's this pirate, he flirts a lot with Emily's barmaid character. And Emily can't really pass whether the attention and the flirting as their characters is real or not, because she's like, are we just our characters at that point, or is it actually us? So there is a lot of confusion that comes with that, but they still very much enjoy flirting. Emily also doesn't really view Willow Creek, where she's staying temporarily, as somewhere she would stay for a long time, but she starts to get to know people and she starts to put down roots and she's slowly starting to change her mind. And she also can't stop thinking about Simon. I really enjoyed the setting of this one. I enjoyed the characters. I now really want to go to a Ren fair. In terms of all the books in this video, this is probably the one I rated the lowest, but it's still one that I really enjoyed. And I actually looked at the cover and I forgot what it was about. And then when I read the synopsis, I was like, oh yeah, the Ren fair. That was so much fun to kind of experience through Emily's eyes. So it was a book that was like a little bit forgettable, but at the time it was really enjoyable. And I really loved getting into the setting, like I said, and these characters, like, they did have a bit of a rocky road because trying to figure out the realness of their flirting or not. It was a bit of a drama through the story, and I read this because I knew it would be fun. I knew I would like the setting, and the romance be damned, like, it would be a fun time regardless. Sometimes I can take drama, sometimes I can't, and in this one I was like, no, it's an outlier. I'll just enjoy it for what it is. And that's why I wanted to talk about it, because I don't really see it mentioned anywhere very often, but I really liked the tension between the characters and I like how this story concluded. So that's why I wanted to mention it. But I'd mentioned it last because it's not my favorite of all of the ones that I've talked about so far. So that is all of my romance book recommendations. I hope you had a fantastic month, a fantastic Valentine's Day. Let me know more romance recommendations if they've got a bit of fantasy, even better. But thank you so much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.